by Ordeal of Justice. Very much as though he were entering a disreputable place, Matthew Kerrigan slipped furtively from the taxicab into the hallway of the old New York mansion made over into an apartment house. He stood at the door, portly, important, wrapped in his fur coat. He pushed the button marked Mr. Sergius. A young Russian butler admitted him. "Just say a Mr. Smith," Kerrigan announced importantly. Across the Russian boy's harsh features there was the shadow of contempt. He reappeared in an instant and held open a door for Kerrigan. Kerrigan had been expecting something of the dark, perfumed, cheap interior of a palmist's studio, or the meretricious mystery of a clairvoyant apartment with its crystal glass on faded velvet. Even Kerrigan's untrained, Broadwayish mind was awestruck by the huge, somber living room into which he was ushered. He sensed, rather than understood, the richness of the pictures and hangings, the beautiful ceiling. Only in books and papers had he seen anything like the great white borzoi lying before the roaring fireplace like a patient cat. The man he had come to see was sitting by the fire, dead white features against a black background. Lean, emaciated, with his full black beard, black cassock, and high black headdress of the Greek monk, he seemed more spirit than body. He looked at Kerrigan with the insolence of a prince. Yes, he did not ask Kerrigan to sit down. Kerrigan had planned a neat speech, somewhat humorous, cynical, patronizing, but it had fled from his memory. He felt a sort of vague terror, as though this man were probing, uninvited, inside his soul and mind. "I heard downtown," he muttered. "Yes," the monk said impatiently. "What do you want me to do?" "I wondered, Mr. Brother Sergius. I wondered, Brother Sergius, if it were possible to hold converse or see or have some communication with a person who's been dead some time, some 14 years. The monk was looking at him keenly. What had this well-fed businessman, with the sweeping mustache and obviously massaged face, to do with the dim inhabitants of death? "How did this man die?" the monk Sergius asked. "By accident," Matthew Kerrigan answered. "He drowned himself." "What interest have you in him?" "They say he killed himself on account of me." Kerrigan's voice broke out as though he were pleading to a judge. "It's not true." "You don't know whether it's true or not." The Greek monk was studying Kerrigan's terrified features. "Can it be done?" Kerrigan was surprised at himself, so hoarse his voice sounded, so sincere his tones. "I must know about it. Can it be done?" "It can be done," the monk nodded. "If there's any fee," Kerrigan suggested. "There is no fee." The monk laughed contemptuously. "I act for the good of souls when it is necessary." He watched Kerrigan intently for some minutes. "On Monday morning at 2 in the morning, if the weather is clear, I will send for you. Leave your name and address with the butler." And he turned again to the book he was reading, oblivious of Kerrigan, as a great lord might be of the peasant standing awkward and awe-stricken in his presence. Financial agents admire Matthew Kerrigan. He is the sort of person who gives them no trouble. They are more cordial toward him than they are toward great bankers or great Wall Street men. For great bank presidents and stock manipulators wage terrific and lyrical battles on the terrain of commerce, and though there are great Leipzigs and Jenas, there are also great Waterloos. But Kerrigan is safe. He takes no chances. His factories in Yonkers purr, day in, day out, making by the million that simple fastening device for women's corsets that has made him several fortunes. That's the way to make money, they will tell you. Just hit upon something simple and necessary, like a hairpin or a shoehorn, that no other person has thought of. Make it and sell it to the public and bank your money in gilt-edged securities. Look at Matthew Kerrigan, and not 15 years ago he was a clerk in an accountant's office. Along Broadway, too, he is known favorably, in that happy-go-easy circle of minor actors, wine merchants, and women aspirants for the stage and movies. Head waiters are deferential and slightly contemptuous toward him. He is a good spender, and yet there is something repulsive, unhealthy in the way he enjoys food and drink and looks at women. 6 things doth the Lord hate, yea 7, which are an abomination unto him, and the first is haughty eyes. I cannot conceive that as denoting the light that shines from eyes lit from a sense of high and noble lineage, of chivalrous ideals, of just power. I translate it by the eyes of Matthew Kerrigan, those gray, full orbs which look about a room stating that there is no man present whose equal and superior Kerrigan is now. Eyes which tell you Kerrigan has money, and is prepared to spend money for what he wants. You know that man will get good measure for his money shrewdness and sophistication gleam from them in a wary, reptilian way. They may call this the Rube City, Morgenthau, the little real estate broker, announced at the Elks Club. But believe me, there's one guy in town they can't put anything over on, and that's Kerrigan. He's wise. I tell you, boy, he's wise. Did you hear about that baby at the Winter Garden that tried to pull that hard luck story on him? You didn't, eh? Well, let me tell you something, she got hers. There is one other place you may collect facts about Matthew Kerrigan, and that is the downtown lunchrooms of the financial district. Uncomfortable, clattering places where you eat on a high stool at a counter and compute the price of your meal to the cashier as you go out. There is a race of clerks there, old men, natty but shabby of dress, pinched in the face, gray-headed, stoop-shouldered. Some of them are bitter and many are garrulous. They specialize in the early histories of well-known men. I remember him when he was a bum in the street. They will tell you of nearly all of them. When he had got a nickel for a shoe shine, did you ever hear how he got on his feet? And then will follow either a sordid or a criminal story. And from them, you can learn the story of Matthew Kerrigan and Leonard Holt. An office friend had told Kerrigan of an eccentric inventor who lived out in his hometown of Inglewood. A poor, poverty-stricken scatterbrain mechanic who plotted in a broken-down cottage on the outskirts of Inglewood at magnificent and foolish dreams, such as aviation and perpetual motion. When Kerrigan went out to see his friend, he was taken, on a rainy afternoon, to pass the dull hours, on a visit to the man Holt. Beyond an occasional dunning tradesman, who sneered at him, and an occasional equally poor friend who remonstrated with him and urged him to take a position in a factory, Holt saw no one. And when Kerrigan was introduced, he talked like a starved fanatic. Tall, loosely built as though his jointures were precarious, stooped, with great greasy hands, sandy-haired, with burning blue eyes and a high forehead, and a listless mouth and chin, one might have been pardoned for believing him an impractical fool. He pointed out a large system of wheels and pulleys, of weights and springs. It was the perpetual motion model on which he was working. But I thought perpetual motion had been given up as impossible, Kerrigan objected. They have been making strides toward it, Holt answered. The strut apparat was a great advance. Of course, a small quantity of radium is necessary, but still, energy maybe it is just possible created mechanically. They disprove perpetual motion by the hypothesis of the conservation of energy, which is not proven. And so he went on at great length in his jerky sentences, while Kerrigan listened, picking up things and dropping them boredly: a Bunsen burner, a pair of pliers, a tripod, whatnot. He lifted 2 pieces of asbestos, clamped queerly together by 2 long pieces of flexible metal. As he toyed with it, the thing came apart in his hands. A snap, and it was together again. Kerrigan looked up in interest. What's this for? A little fastening trick, of no practical use except, perhaps, for women's corsets, Holt laughed. Kerrigan was silent. Patented, he suggested after a while. Everything I have is patented, Holt said with a touch of pride. May I bring it along, Kerrigan asked, to show it to a friend? Why, certainly, Holt nodded. Now, if you understand that the energy develops in geometric progression. And very efficiently did Matthew Kerrigan show Holt's fastening device to his friend, a prominent banker who had never heard of Kerrigan before, but had always money to sink, at a price, in worthy enterprises. Kerrigan returned to Holt. There may be something in that little thing of yours. Will you take $100 for it outright? But that intuition, which sometimes warns the unworldly minded, and that mulish obstinacy which some men have, made Holt stand out for a share of the profits, and unwillingly, Kerrigan and his associate had to allow it. It's a hold-up, they complained to each other bitterly, but we can't do anything about it. So Holt was admitted to the profits of his patent, and for a while he dreamed dreams of wealth untellable. A wealth that would enable him to send his motherless 3-year-old daughter to boarding school and college, and leave him in peace to work, with all appliances to hand, stud apparat and radium, and everything at the problem which had baffled scientific dreamers since the dawn of intelligence. The model on a big scale, he figured, would cost $10,000, and on his visions went unhampered, unselfish, unpractical. He wanted to benefit the world by his discovery and to get a little applause, a little credit. I don't know how they do these things, but they do them, and they must do them skillfully, for they evade the law, the iron law which insists on justice for all men. Kerrigan laid his hand feelingly on Holt's shoulder. "I'm sorry, old man," he said with that sincere stop in his voice. "We made a mistake. It's not practical." Holt had received many blows and was nearly impervious to them. He smiled wistfully. "Perhaps I can do something," Kerrigan continued. "I might get a little for your rights from someone who will take a chance. I should like you to get something for it. I led you to believe so much in it." They were very generous, for they knew there were millions ahead of them, so they gave Holt $1,000, and he buckled to again at his grotesque machine. A few weeks later, some well-intentioned Christian told him the truth and commented fulsomely on what a fool Holt was. The last blow was the fatal one. It split his heart in two. Methodically, he made arrangements for his child to be brought up in a convent, and he left what money he had for the purpose. He took the train to New York, and crossing on the ferry boat, he climbed to the upper deck. He sat huddled up in a corner, gray and shabby of clothes, gray and shabby of face, until the boat was halfway over. He stood up on the seat and jumped, and the noise his jump made was drowned in the clatter of the paddles. Tall, lank, oblivious, unpractical your economist will tell you that the man was of no value to the community and was better dead. And your religious person will tell you that the crime of suicide merits hellfire. But somehow I feel that, for these poor men with the light heads and the light bodies, and the heavy, heavy hearts, there is somewhere understanding and great tenderness. All this they will tell you, the garrulous and bitter old men, and while they inveigh against Kerrigan, you see somewhere in their eyes a glint of admiration and of envy. The arena of Wall Street differs little from the arena of Neronic Rome. Vi victis is the motto and the rule of the game. And before you can leave them in contemptuous horror, they will tap you on the knee, gloatingly dramatic. And now Kerrigan is going to marry Holt's daughter. Can you beat it? Can you beat that? He had gone perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps out of the depths of sentimentality that men of his type have somewhere in the bottom of their hearts with his cousin, the chubby little minister of religion, to the prize-giving at the convent in Newark. The bishop was there, and a play of Dunsany's was given, a few poems recited, and a song or two sung. His eye had been attracted all through the exercises by a tall girl in a white dress, with a blue sash, a slim girl, with hazel eyes and light brown hair, who in the distance had the profile of a Saint Cecilia, with a somewhat broad, honest mouth and good firm teeth. "That's an attractive girl," he told his cousin. The little cherubic minister, who worried in secret about his cousin's soul, was delighted. He dreamed often of having his cousin Matthew reformed by the influence of some sweet woman. A Dominican religious brought her forward. "Miss Holt, Miss Agnes Holt." Kerrigan was introduced to her. He talked banalities to her for a half hour, when she shyly took her leave of him, blushing furiously under the glances of her schoolmates. When he was alone, Kerrigan smiled queerly, with a distant look in his eyes. At 45, there comes always to a man of Kerrigan's type, with the first gray hairs, the fear of age. There will be an inevitable day when he will no longer attract women, and when, in the bars and about the clubs, he will be referred to as an old man of another generation. And there arises in his mind the fear of loneliness in the 50s and the 60s, with death hurrying breathlessly toward him day by day. The only thing to do then is to begin anew with a young wife, far away from the swirl of the city. "It's the only life," they say pathetically. "A wife and kiddies, a little bit of land somewhere away from all this stuff." And they wave their hands at the gleaming glasses and the pictures on the barroom walls. "There's nothing to it," they aver, and they drink up and have another one. He met the religious as he was going away. "That Miss Holt," he said, "is a very attractive girl." It was the only adjective he knew to fit her. "Yes," the nun agreed. "We all like her. She's been with us nearly all her life. Her father died when she was young. He was an inventor. Leonard Holt was his name." The name is familiar. Kerrigan was shocked, but his self-restraint was superb. "Died after some business depression, if I remember aright." "He was murdered." The little religious's eyes flashed magnificently. "Murdered in the way of business." Kerrigan had heard that word used of Holt's end more than once. But the 14 years had been full ones, and the matter had not troubled him much. Things like that happened so often. And besides, it was not true. A murder predicates a murderer, and he was no murderer. It was all a business arrangement. And the man could "'ent stand the gaff, that was all. All rotten foolishness, he swore. But somehow, this last time, perhaps on account of the dramatic meeting with the daughter, it would not go out of his head. And no more would go out of his head the thought and picture of Agnes Holt in her white dress and blue sash, with her Saint Cecilia profile. She haunted him night and day. At that period, peculiar in a man as the late 30s are in women, he fell in love, or in what for him would pass for love. In all his selfish business career, he had known intimately no woman like her, and her aloof, unrifled virginity struck him like a blinding flash of light. After all, he said, in the manner of his kind, there is nothing on God's earth like a sweet, pure woman. And for days he thought about her and about love, not as a young man might, in a burning equation with factors of living flame, but in the smoldering symbols of maturity, which are so long in the consuming and so hard to quench. He would go away from Broadway, quit the whole condemned shooting match, as he weirdly termed it, and take a place in Westchester or Long Island, a good, comfortable house with grounds to it. They would be glad to have him in such a community. He would be one of the village trustees, run for president, and he would fashion a new life there with a young and beautiful bride whom everybody would envy him. There would be children, too. Undoubtedly there would be children. She'll be glad to get away from the convent, he thought shrewdly, and after all, perhaps he had treated Holt a bit shabbily. He would make up for it in the way he would treat his daughter. She should wear diamonds. I'm thinking of marrying and settling down, Father John, he told the little clergyman one day. I'm glad to hear of it, Cousin Matthew, he said, rubbing his plump little hands, his cherub's face beaming benignantly. I'm delighted, I am so, he shook his finger waggishly. And I think I know the young lady, too. It's the little Holt girl we met at the convent that day. You must come over and meet her again, Father John planned. I'll talk to the Mother Superior. And so, with due chaperonage, Kerrigan met Agnes Holt several times, and each time he became more impressed with her. She would say little, blushing mostly, and playing with something in her lap. She understood vaguely that this portly, mustached man was thinking of marrying her, but that denoted nothing to her, so cloistered had her life been. Yes or no, or thank you, was nearly the limit of her conversation, and she had difficulty in not adding sir. At times she would accompany him, with Father John, to a matinee in New York to see a carefully chosen family production, or to have tea at the less worldly restaurants. Occasionally she would burst out with a naive exclamation. I once rode in a Fifth Avenue bus with Sister Mary Joseph, was the sort of thing she would vouchsafe. If you were to marry her, Father John said, she would enter the convent as a lay sister. More and more as he met her, Kerrigan's mind was taken up by the idea of her father. The contour of her face, a certain look of her eye, a light in her hair when the sun shone on it, would recall the inventor, and immediately within him would rise a measure of uneasiness which he could not get rid of. He once asked her if she remembered him. He died when I was young, very young, she said. An accident in a ferry boat. I have spent all my life with the sisters. As he went to and from the convent, he often met the religious who had spoken of Holt's death as murder. And as often as he met her, so often would his mind revert to that sinister word, and he would find himself arguing about it internally, as though he were defending himself in a court of law. He would try to shake off the mood. Of all the blamed foolishness, he would tell himself angrily. But the idea would persist, and, growing morbid about it, he found himself reading carefully the charges of judges in cases of homicide. He went to the public library and conned upon the subject in encyclopedias. He read of the magnificent fair play in trial by jury. I guess that settles it, he told himself. There's nothing to it. He went on, however, and, reading farther, he came on the ancient custom of trial by ordeal of justice, of the test of a man's innocence, by touching the dead body of a murdered man. If the person suspected were guilty, blood would exude from the corpse. A couplet of Shakespeare's was quoted from the play of Richard Roman III. Oh, gentlemen, see, dead Henry's wounds open their congealed mouths and bleed afresh. The thing made his flesh creep. He read of the grisly test of the dead hand, and of the ordeal by fire and the ordeal by poison. There's no sense to that, he muttered angrily, and little beads of perspiration gathered on his brow. Even the innocent would waver under such a test. Trial by jury, that was the sensible way. And then, one day, in a bleak sitting room in the convent, he proposed to Agnes Holt. Agnes, he cleared his throat, and he was honestly husky. I suppose you have understood that my intentions toward you had a wedding in view. I can make you very happy. I must talk to the Mother Superior, she said, blushing furiously, her voice low. He took her hand and, opening a case, put a ring on her finger. I have talked to the Mother Superior myself, he told her, and that is all right. He drew her toward him, trembling a little, and on her forehead with his mustached lips he kissed her. He was suddenly still and strangely cold. The touch of that skin reminded him of his last handshake with Leonard Holt. I must put an end to this obsession, he told himself angrily, that night at his hotel, and he poured himself stiff drinks of bourbon. Should he tell Father John? No, he decided. He knew Father John well for a relative and a friend and a genial companion with lovable peccadillos. But he knew, too, that the little clergyman could thunder with the thunder of Sinai. Marry the daughter of a man in whose death he was implicated. Never would Father John consent. The cleric would not understand. What could a priest know of business? It's no use going to him, Kerrigan decided. He stopped a moment, thinking. And, half laughing and half nervous, he remembered a conversation with a friend of his, a great Wall Street operator, who combined the shrewdness of his kind with his kind's superstition, and had recourse in moments of tension to clairvoyance and tarot cards. He told Kerrigan of M. Sergius. He's a Greek monk been expelled from Mount Athos for practicing magic. What that man can tell you. I suppose the next thing you'll tell me is that he raises spirits. Listen, you just ask Cabot Montgomery how they found that will of Van Vliet's. Just ask him. There's one born every minute, Kerrigan laughed, and some of 'em live. Listen, brother, Kerrigan was told, this man does it for nothing. Do you get me? For nothing. If it's important enough, he'll do it, if not outside. This is none of your country fair crystal gazers. In Kerrigan, too, was that strain of superstition that all men laugh at and all men have. And right now, as he sat in a mental, spiritual whirlwind, the memory of that conversation came to him as a preserver. After all, if he put things to the test, of course it was foolish. It was ridiculous, but still nothing could come of it, by any manner of means, and yet. What's the harm? He laughed. At his time of life, he smiled to put himself in the hands of a charlatan to conjure up a spirit. In this century, with the telephone by his bedside, with the electric light overhead, to patronize a mumming magician. Nothing could happen. But that nothing would be his answer. It would mean that his life was free forever, purged of the foolish innuendos, the lunatic accusations of outsiders, the morbid worries of his own abnormal mind. Free to go ahead and be married, and to live happily ever after. When the butler had come for him silently, in the big blue limousine one fine night of stars, he had gone with a little tremor in his veins. What would Father John and the gentle nuns and his little betrothed think of this mad excursion? Well, he had thrown down a gauntlet to fate, and he would go through with it, regardless of the empty issue. There was a witticism on his lips as he entered the apartment, but the witticism froze. Silently, the butler ushered him into a dim room lighted by tapers. In a corner, silent, were Sergius and 4 young men. In the middle of the floor was a strange geometric design of circles and squares. Your butler just came for me. Kerrigan felt the need of saying something, no matter how banal. In a sort of awe, Kerrigan noted the white garments of the former monk and of his disciples, the white shoes embroidered in red, the white crowns with the Hebrew letters. Do you still wish to go ahead with this? The Russian asked him. Of course, Kerrigan uttered. His own voice seemed strange in his ears. You are to obey me in all things. The ex-monk's voice had a terrible hidden menace in it, and if you move out of that circle, you are worse than a dead man. Follow me. They moved forward through an opening into the strange geometric design, and behind them on silent feet came the 4 attendants. Kerrigan noticed in a sort of daze the sword they carried, the trumpet, the book, and the lighted taper. About him, outside the circle, were strange paper symbols that seemed to cut him off from the world of sane and living men. The magus lit a circle of censers about the outer square. He closed the circle and lifted one on high. He swung it toward the 4 corners of the square. An attendant handed him a sword. He stuck it in the ground. Another handed him a trumpet. He blew it brazenly. O Lord, hear my prayer, and let my cry come unto thee. Queer little whorls of smoke mounted through the air from the censers. The attendants had retired to the 4 points of the compass. The magus raised the bare sword. His voice vibrated like an organ. O ye spirits, ye I conjure by the power, wisdom, and virtue of the Spirit of God, by the holy name of God Ahith, by which Adam, having invoked, acquired the knowledge of all created things, by the invisible name Yod, which had Abel invoked he would have escaped from the hand of Cain, his brother. It seemed to Kerrigan, standing there, that about this circle was something that was not life, and that it was cut off from the security of things without as an island is cut off by water. About it, the incense rose in shadowy vapors. The lights of the candles became dulled to a pale, diaphanous gold. There was something terrible about it all. He had imagined a grisly, morbid thing of quackery. This he could have stood smiling. But cold, stern majesty of ritual made his heart contract, as it might be oppressed in the nave of some great cathedral. By the 2 tables of the law, by the 7 burning candlesticks, by the Holy of Holies, where only the high priest may go. He wanted to raise his voice, to tell the man to stop this mummery. He wanted to walk to the door and slam it contemptuously, and to walk home through the cool, mundane air. That would be an end for him of all this morbidness. But somehow he could not go. It was as though he were held by hypnosis to the spot. That spirit who was known here as Leonard Holt, and with whom this man, for a sufficient reason, would converse. I conjure and invoke him in the name of the Lord Adonai. I conjure him in the name of the God El, strong and powerful. Fear arose in Kerrigan like a cold marsh vapor. He had come there in a braggadocio test of fate, to something whose being and name he knew not, to face it man to man, and to abide by the result. But he seemed now to be, as it were, in a dock, not to argue but to be judged, by that vagueness against which he had thrown down the gauntlet. The magus had fallen to his knees. Before him, a disciple held an open book and a taper. In the name of him who hath made the heavens and the earth, and who hath measured them in the hollow of his hand, enclosing the earth in 3 of his fingers. Without those circles now, Kerrigan imagined, things were hovering with a force as of a great wind. Things hurtled themselves against the mystic, powerful symbols like troopers against an impregnable fortalice. No longer was he certain that nothing could happen. If in a minute now, at any instant, the thing that was being called would come, not the vacuous, impractical body, but a terrible being armed with the awful majesty of the dead, standing before him accusingly with terrible eyes, standing like a flaming weapon between Kerrigan and the daughter who was flesh of him, who they said was murdered. If, his skin contracted in a tense horripilation. His breath came shallow and panting, like that of a strained dog. The magus stood up. Again the sword flashed in his hand. He laid his hand on his heart. His voice rang vibrant with power. The acolytes bowed their heads. Here be the symbols of secret things, the standards, the banners, the ensigns of God the Conqueror, the arms of the Almighty One to compel the aerial potencies. I command absolutely. Across Kerrigan's mind thoughts raced like skipping rabbits, like reels of living pictures. He was being tried. His wrist shook as the blood pulsed through. Tried by Ordeal of Justice. By the terrible thing that made a dead man's wounds open when you touched him. By Ordeal of Justice, that was it. He felt his face contract into a horrible grimace. By Ordeal of Justice. There was a weight on his chest of his huge granite blocks, very cold. He couldn't breathe. Through his heart there ran a pain like a knife. By their power and virtue that he come near to us, into our presence from whatsoever part of the world he may be in. Master, an acolyte stepped forward and touched the exorcist's white samite sleeve. He pointed to the crumpled figure in the circle. Master, this man is dead.